Hello, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdom's role-playing game and Fire in the Head Productions. So today I thought I would do a video about combat in the upcoming new edition of Savage Kingdoms, which I'm tentatively calling SK4, or Savage Kingdoms 4th edition. It was called Savage Kingdoms X because the 10th anniversary of the game was actually last year. It's a Roman numeral X, trying to be all cool. So since it's now in year 11 and actually kind of heading into really close to like 12, the X doesn't really apply anymore. I could still call it that, I guess, but it doesn't really resonate as much because it did really mean Roman numeral 10 as in 10th anniversary. So right now it's SK4, tentatively calling it just Savage Kingdoms 4th edition, nothing too fancy. And so, yeah, that's currently what it's called. And by it, I mean that it's currently in play testing. If you've seen previous videos, you probably know that, or if you know me personally. But it's almost it's at like 92% written. I say 92 because I between 90 and 95. And it's currently in like edition, I think I'm on version 4, 4.2, 4.1, something like that of the playtest rules. So my idea is that when I get to version 5 or perhaps even 6 at the most, that'll be pretty much the final product for SK4. That'll be like 99% of it. It'll already have been mostly edited down and stuff like that. Now, when you're laying out for print, obviously you have to trim and edit even a little bit more and be a little more precise. But yeah, so long story short, it's pretty close to being done. But today's focus is about combat, like how combat and the 3-action system will work in the upcoming edition of Savage Kingdoms, also known as SK4. So to preface this before I kind of get into it, just know that combat in general, the combat system, is not changed at all fundamentally. Those of you who have played Savage Kingdoms or at least know something about it, you know that the whole thing runs on a D20. Every all-action resolution is covered by a roll of a single D20. And you don't have any wasted numbers in combat. For example, if you're making an attack roll on your opponent, depending on how you're attacking, whether it's a brawling attack or a melee weapon attack, or it's a ranged weapon, or even a spell attack for the magical art skill, you're rolling a d20 against a target number, right? Which is a defense rating in this case for combat. And if it were a non-combat skill, it would also be called a DR, but it generally means in that case a difficulty rating. Now, a defense rating is really just a difficulty rating as well. It's just a fancy number for a target number. So every number that you succeed or that you exceed over your opponent's target number is how many points of damage you score. So that way you don't have any wasted numbers, such as in Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, stuff like that. You get, say if you roll a 19 to hit an opponent and that opponent's armor class is only 11, the 8 points that went over the 11 don't really matter, right? Because now you roll different dice for damage. And that's all well and good, but it always kind of bothered me, as I was kind of growing up playing tons of D&D. I've been doing this for a long time, but so when coming up with the Savage Kingdom system, that was one thing I wanted to try to do. So in combat, for every number you score above the defense of your opponent is 1 point of damage. No numbers are thrown away. The only time you would throw a number away, like every weapon has a maximum damage rating. For example, a fist or a kick or a headbutt, an unarmed attack basically, does up to 5 maximum points of damage. So if you did roll a 19 over someone's defensive 11 in SK and scored by 8 over, you wouldn't do 8 points of damage in this case, it would be 5. However, there's a talent called Heavy Hitter that increases the max damage of your, and Martial Artist as well also does it, of your unarmed attacks. Daggers, for example, do 10 points of damage maximum. Short swords, 15. Longsword is 20. Great sword is 25. All the way up to great axe is, actually I think great axes are now 25. They used to be 30, but I've kind of tightened the weapon system. It was pretty tight before. I was pretty happy with it, but I've kind of tightened all that up a little bit. And you'll see that. That'll be, I may not mention that necessarily through the rest of this video that we're about to get into, but just kind of know that's part of the design. It's all there for a reason. It's not to nerf anything, as people like to say. It's not to make anything, but it's just a tighter way of doing it for the whole game. There's no intent to nerf anything. or whatever the terminology is that people like to throw around. So I just want to let you know, fundamentally, the combat system does not change. So what I'm about to go through are just kind of little tweaks that you might find in SK Combat. And if you're new to Savage Kingdoms, period, that's great. This will all be new information. So the first thing with combat would be encounter distant, right? Encounter distance. And that's generally the purvey of the perception skill. So perception is one of the 28 skills in Savage Kingdoms. They're in the current book, and in the published book, it'll have it as well. So every skill has its skill entry or skill description, and the perception skill is no exception and has different things you can do with perception, as in perceiving things. Obviously, is detecting people sneaking around, detecting something from a far distance or in the dark. And there's an encounter distance section, and I'm not sure if I'm going to put it in the perception section or in the combat section. Right now, it's currently at the beginning of the combat chapter, just I guess probably where it belongs. I just might footnote it from the perception. Maybe I'll put it in both. I kind of hate doing that, but maybe it's not really that long, so maybe it's fine. But yeah, that's going to determine encounter distance. So that's kind of how you start a combat or a potential combat. So if, say, for example, an enemy is using stealth, a potential enemy, I should say, is like sneaking up on the party is camping overnight. These adventurers are camping around their campfire, and maybe one or two has a tent up. Others are sleeping on the ground. Maybe a Chinari is sleeping up in the trees, something like that. Their horses are tied up, perhaps. And there's a creature sneaking forward. So it's sneaking, right? So it's going to use the stealth skill. So every time it moves, it has to make a stealth skill roll against the perception skill rolls of the PCs in this example. And this could be vice versa as well. This could be flipped, right? Now there's an option for a static perception. Sort of like Dungeons & Dragons has passive perception. I'm calling it static perception just to be different. And that's basically 10 plus your perception bonus, just like D&D. So you can use passive perception. That way you're not tipping off the PCs that something's sneaking up on them, or all, even the really good role players are, it's kind of hard not to kind of metagame that something might be moving in on you. But that's how you can determine. So a sneaky creature could get right all the way up to a PC, or vice versa. A PC could sneak all the way up to a potential enemy without even being detected. In that case, if you do surprise an opponent, you gain one free action. So if you were able to sneak right up to somebody, you could make an attack if that was your intent, or maybe grapple them. Grappling, however, takes 2 actions, so you'd only get like halfway into that action before initiative would to be rolled, which I'm about to get into. Otherwise, spotting something that's not sneaking would be a purvey of the perception skill as well. Then there's like a chart in the perception, but like something's a mile away, but it's on a mountaintop, and it kind of gives you an idea what the difficulty rating might be. In other words, what number you'd have to roll, the target number, stuff like that. So also, for example, you can use perception skill to determine range categories. So range categories in SK, I'm still working on it, tweaking it. I think I like it overall. I've kind of got rid of like any of the bigger movement beyond 20 yards is now in different range categories. So you have close range, which is basically up to 10 yards, and that can be tracked if you're still using a grid, and it's also really easy to do, theater of mind. Short range is close range. Short range is 20 yards, but you can still track on a grid. But then beyond that, at medium range, because that's roughly 50 yards, you're kind of off the purvey of, I keep using the word purvey, that's like in my head today, the scope of like most battle maps. And so it's now becoming more abstract. So you have medium range, next is long range, which is approximately up 100 yards. And then extreme range is the 5th category, and that's up to around 200 yards. So, for example, if you make a perception roll, say if you roll a 22, and that means that you spotted the enemy. I think I'm trying to remember my chart. I think it's at medium range, up to 50 yards. Maybe it's 100. That kind of determines where the encounter distance starts. Now, that's all modified by the terrain. So there's a nice little chart that kind of modifies the terrain. Well, an open desert, open plains. Maybe it's one category further than you thought. If it's indoors or in the streets or underground, that's 1 or 2 range categories closer than what the base is. And there's a nice little chart for it. And it's easy to eyeball. Like once you kind of read through the chart once or twice, you could probably eyeball it pretty easily. and be pretty darn accurate or close enough anyway. So all that's accounted for: terrain, lighting or lack thereof, whether there's fog or heavy rain, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to include more of that because I didn't really include too much of that last edition. In fact, hardly any of that I really published. So, all right. So after your perception roll, after you determine encounter distance, you would roll initiative. After that surprise attack, or if you spotted a potential enemy 30, 35 yards away, 50 yards away, whatever. So the way I handle, just a little side note, the way I handle initiative is maybe a little different than a lot of game masters. I mean, I think I've seen some do it. It's just a subtle little difference. So I typically don't announce initiative until it's like obvious, like somebody triggers something, someone as in a player character, where the player says that they're going to do something that may or may not be violent or requires quick thoughts, something's happening and possibly triggering a violent encounter. Then I'll say roll initiative. I try not to do it early because it seems to put in people's mind, particularly younger players. I do run a lot of youth Dungeons and Dragons. That they kind of think that, oh, we're rolling initiative, that means this is a fight. And I don't want people to necessarily think that. Maybe it's not necessarily a fight. But if it seems to be someone's drawing a sword, someone's launching an arrow, obviously that's going to trigger initiative. And that's what I would call for it. So initiative is just like very similar to D&D. It's on the D20, Savage Kingdoms. The whole system's based on the roll of a single D20. Everything runs off of a D20. You don't have to worry about other dice. Makes the game kind of sleek, slick, and pretty fast. There's a little head math, but it's no more than having to add up 8d6 after another roll from D&D. In fact, to me, it's actually much quicker. SK is much quicker to adjudicate with the math. So yeah, everything's on a D20, and so if you roll a natural 20, it explodes, meaning that you get to roll the D20 again and add that result to the original result plus the modifier. You only have the skill modifier once, though. You don't do it both times. If you score a 20 again on the reroll, that does not, it's closed. It's no longer open-ended. So it used to be in previous editions you could roll again. It was really, really rare. I only saw it happen like twice. But it could, and then it just kind of made it wonky. The numbers got really big and ridiculous, and it seemed almost kind of silly. So it kind of caps at the next. I mean, if you roll 2 natural 20s back to back, you're probably doing pretty well. There's probably no reason. You've got at least a 40 right there, right? Unless you have like a big penalty for something. And then if you're really good at that particular skill or whatever it is that you're doing, you might end up with a 45, maybe even a 50. I think that's enough. I don't think you need to deal with 60s and 70s. So in combat, that's going to be on just about any kind of humanoid. That's going to be an auto kill if you're wielding a really huge weapon, because you might score over the opponent's defense in this case by like 25. The average sort of commoner, average sort of person, merchant, even a militiaman is only like 10 or 11 health. In the system, a well-trained, adventurer who's built to be more of a warrior might have 20, 22, maybe even 25. So even that person is, if not instantly killed, like knocked unconscious and incapacitated, in pretty bad shape. So you can see what I'm saying. Like, you don't really need the numbers in the 60s when a 45 is already really going to do it. And this is just combat. And you can crit any skill in the Savage Kingdoms game system. You can critically succeed alchemy, acrobatics, animal handling, performance, survival, sailing, all of those things, lore. So, and there'll be a handy little chart under each skill that gives you examples of what crits, what critical successes could be. Most of the skills list like 2, 3, 4 different little things. Now, each spell has a more specific effect of what happens. But I'll get to spells and magic in the next system. Let's continue on with combat, right? Because I get derailed, as you can see, as my earplug falls out at the perfect time. I only do one take from these videos, guys, so you get what you get. So there it is. I'm not going to edit any of this stuff. I just don't have time. So for initiative, roll a d20. Initiative is based on agility plus willpower, like in previous editions. You can critically succeed, just like any other d20 roll in the system. So if you, the DR would be your opponent's initiative result. For example, say your opponent rolled an 8 for initiative, and you roll a 20, meaning it exploded, and you get to roll a d20 again. Or, I left this out from moments ago, you can choose to add plus 10. So when you get an exploding 20, you can choose to gain plus 10, or you can take a chance and roll again. I say take a chance because you could, pretty 45% chance you're going to roll the same or lower than the 10. It's 55% chance you're rolling higher. So the odds are slightly with you. The caveat to that is the DM side, the game master side, the GM side of things, we have to take plus 10 always. We don't get to choose to do the D20. And that's probably kind of for obvious reasons. You don't want the game to be too swingy. So it's very simple, and it's also very easy math. You're like 20, okay, that's a 30, plus the creature's bonus of plus 4, 34. So yeah. So an initiative, if you get 20 above your opponent's initiative number, because in this case it's the target number, right? Then you have scored a critical success and initiative, and that means you get 4 actions in the opening round of combat or combat-like action scene, because not all combat necessarily is fighting and violence. Sometimes you want to use the combat system in order to track, like say a street chase, or a chase through the streets, or a chase through the jungles, or some other kind of like exciting action scene where every moment needs to be kind of measured in actions. So yeah, you get 4 actions instead of 3 on the opening round. Now, in the previous editions, there was only a 2-action system, or a 2-action economy and SK, and you got a 3rd action. So that's actually mathematically a little bit better than the new one. I was toying with the fact of saying you get 2 extra, but that's way too much. I think 1 action's enough. Yeah, so speaking of which, takes us to the 3-action system, one of the things I'm most excited about, and I think I teased it and maybe in a previous video. I also have a 3-action system in Red Sun, so maybe that's what you've heard about. I first designed it in Red Sun, and I liked it so much I kind of ported it over to SK4. So 3 actions is really cool. It sounds amazing, and it is, but it's not maybe as amazing as you think, because 3 actions, you're like, oh my god, I get to do 3 different things. Can I attack 3 times? So yes and no. So mostly no, but possibly yes. Meaning that, so only one of your actions you get 1 attack, regardless of what, regardless of who you are, what kind of animal, creature, humanoid race that you're playing in the game. Everybody gets 1 attack, unless you have a racial ability or a talent that allows you to get a 2nd and possibly even a 3rd attack, which isn't that difficult. It's kind of hard to start off with that ability. But there are talents like ambidexterity, dual blades, pugilistic follow-up, shield bash, stuff like that. There's a few others. Rapid strike, I think, is one, but that's a little bit higher, striking twice with the same weapon. So that allows you to gain a 2nd attack, which would also be a 2nd action. You could possibly even take a 3rd action. For example, a good example is a Chernari with a claw, because they have a claw attack, which takes 1 action. They could also make a weapon attack, or even another claw attack, but it would be a 2nd action. And if they had, the pugilistic follow-up talent, they could strike for a 3rd time with a brawling attack, whether it's a headbutt or a kick or whatever, however you want to describe it. And there's other ways too, like a Sleer has a bite attack, so they can bite and also use a whip thrust with a spear / with a scimitar, or whatever it is. And then possibly even a 3rd attack if they have a talent that allows them to do that. But even just right off the bat, by virtue of them being a Sleer or Chernari, they can have as many as 2 attacks in the round, which is pretty cool. So, however, each attack does take its own action, which is really nice. So you can almost imagine it like you have 3 slots to fill in your action, in your activity on your turn. If there are attacks, if you can do 3 attacks, all 3 of those slots can be filled with attacks. However, most likely, most people are going to use 1 action at least to move, and you can move up to a number of yards equal to your mobility, as it was in the past. Savage Kingdoms measures distances on yards instead of feet. I've always found that a little more practical. Keeps the numbers a little bit lower too. You could even move twice. You could take 2 actions to move twice. Say if your mobility is, your mobility rating 7, and you could move twice and go 14 yards if you want to before you do action number 3. You could spend all 3 actions to move if you want to. So casting a spell in combat, by the way, is 2 actions because that's not the normal way of spell casting in Savage Kingdoms. I know those of you who have played probably know what I'm talking about. Most player characters, yes, use battle magic or spontaneous magic as I call it, meaning that it takes 2 actions to speak and gesture this incantation. So roughly that's 4 seconds. Combat round is 6 seconds. So therefore, an action is basically 2 seconds. It's another reason the 3-action system breaks down really well in a 6-second round. Because yes, SK rounds are like D&D rounds are 6 seconds. I actually was going to change that to like 5 seconds to be different. I think at first edition SK, a combat round was 5 seconds. So 12 rounds was a minute instead of 10. And I changed it just because the 10 rounds for a minute is just easier. I see why D&D did it. And then I thought about changing it, but I was like, wait a minute, with 3 actions, it makes even more sense because that's like 2 seconds per action. Now it's still kind of ambiguous. Drawing a sword, most people can do in less than 2 seconds. However, if it's a big axe that you have to, maybe that does take 2 seconds. So, and casting a spell in combat is 2 actions, right? Now, going back to magic really quick, I know that's a later video I'm going to do later this week. Ritual magic is the way most people in the world, at least most NPCs in the SK world, perform magic because it's a lot more better chance of success. It doesn't a lot less chance it's going to go awry. Meaning that, so in SK, if you score a natural 1 on your die roll and the total result is 10 less than the difficulty rating of what you're trying to do, or if you get a 0, regardless, like say if you rolled a 2 and you have -2 in that ability, you have 0, you end up with 0, those are critical failures. Now in magical arts and combat, when using battle magic, a natural 1 is always a critical failure, regardless if you fail. Even if you fail the roll, you only fell by 7 of the DR, it's still because I wanted to make magic a little more edgy, risky, darker. It always kind of has been an SK, but I've never quite done as good a job as I thought I could with that. And I wanted to give a little more credence to ritual magic. Player characters were using ritualized spells like somewhat often, but not as much as I thought. So casting a spell as a ritual is now not only do you get a +4 bonus instead of +2 like in the past, but if you roll a natural 1, it's not automatically a critical failure, unless it's 10 less, like in the normal rules. It's not automatically a crit fail like in battle magic. So just a little caveat there. So continuing the example, if you could cast a spell costing 2 actions and you could strike with a physical weapon, make a physical attack as your 3rd action. So that's a cool little sweet spot that people have discovered, and I don't think it's a loophole. I've had a couple playtesters going, "Oh wow, that's pretty sweet if you can," but it's not as sweet as you think because you're taking 2 actions to cast a spell. Some spells are spells that say go on your weapon, and so you would need that 3rd attack to even be able to really make the spell useful for that round. So that's one reason for it. But I also think fantasy-wise, in fiction-wise, imagination-wise, it's really cool to see like a spellcaster like incant something and then still thrust with a spear or something like that. Because if you've played SK before, there are kind of your doddering old wizards and sorcerers in the world and witches and warlocks, but a lot of spellcasters in SK are fairly athletic people that can also kind of fight a little bit in combat. Trying to stay away from the what's the Gish trope or whatever from the warrior mage trope is more of a thing that you can kind of do in SK. Yes, you're wearing armor. You're going to kind of mess with your magical arts because that is you take a skill penalty to those skill rolls. But just in the flavor and the fiction of the world, spellcasters aren't necessarily always these like crippled, unathletic people. So the idea of being able to do a physical attack and a spell in the same round is, I think, kind of cool. Anyway, so that's the 3-action system. Oh yeah, before I move away from that, a reason I was giving the example about drawing a sword taking 2 seconds. So the 3-action system is cool, right? But maybe not as cool as you think because it's used to track every single action, which is nice. It's really nice, and I have to worry about it. For example, in previous SK, and I like that system. You had 2 actions, And then you could take a there were free actions, but 2 free actions equaled an action. For example, drawing a weapon was a free action, but drawing a second weapon was a second free action, meaning that whole thing took an action. Or resheathing something was, to give an example. So now everything is just an action. And so that's why you get 3. So 3, it's really cool that you can do 3 different things, but just remember one of those actions sometimes might be something sort of trivial that used to be a free action. However, there is a talent called Quick Draw that allows you to draw a weapon as a free action. It doesn't even count as an action, or no action, maybe I should say. I might even call it that. If you have the ambidexterity talent, you can actually draw 2 weapons at the same time, neither one of them costing any actions, which is kind of cool. It represents the fact that one would assume you've trained with fighting in that style if you have those talents. I mean, that's kind of what the talents represent in the first place, right? All right, so I think it's enough about the 3 actions. Oh, one last thing. So if you critically fail initiative, meaning if you roll a natural 1 and your total initiative is 10 shy of your opponent's, that's a critical failure, you only start the combat with 2 actions. And what I mean by that, the opening round, you only get 2 actions. And then from the next few rounds, everything else is back to 3 actions. Same with the critical success. You get 4 actions in the opening round, and then it goes back to normal. And basically represents that you're on the ball, that you just kind of like, or just on it, and that's why you get the 4. Whereas the crit failure with the 2 actions represents the fact that you kind of, you sort of nodded off there for, well, probably not nodded off, but you were kind of lost focus for a second or two, or maybe you're taking a couple seconds to think about like what's happening or like what to do. So, all right, moving on. So to my point number 4, I guess here. So attack rolls. So attack rolls are still there. They are usually provided by the melee weaponry, range weaponry, or brawling skill, depending on how you're attacking. Thrusting with a spear is a melee weaponry attack. Throwing a spear is range weaponry. Brawling would be things like punching or kicking, or these are all just examples. Melee weaponry is guided by physique, as it was in the past. So, like, that's basically how big and strong you are, kind of a amalgamation of those 2 things. However, there's still a talent. There's a talent called agile weaponry, which allows you to use your agility instead of your physique when wielding light weapons. So if you're still wielding a big old maul or mace or great sword or great axe, you're still using physique regardless, as it should be. Kind of hard to finesse an 8-pound weapon. Range weaponry is, you see my cat in the background. Hi, Nymeria. Sorry, it's my cat voice. So the black and white creature behind me is Nymeria. Yeah, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you recognize the name. What are you doing back there? What you doing? Helping Daddy with his video? All right. Might actually have more viewers now that my cat's in there. Trying to get attention. One of my cats. We have 2. Where was I? Yeah, so those are all types of attack rolls. And sometimes certain spells are basically an attack roll too against an opponent's defense. So you're rolling, you're always making, if whenever you attack, you're using some sort of one of those skills to roll against the opponent's defense. Going on to the next point, number 5 here. So defenses come in dodge and parry, like they did in the past. Dodge is the, my cat's pulling focus, totally pulling focus. I love it. Dodge is based off, it's 10 plus your total acrobatics skill modifier, which means it includes agility. And your parry defense is 10 plus your melee weaponry total skill modifier, which includes, of course, physique. So that hasn't changed. There is a third defense. It's really just an extension of the parry defense, but it's called shield defense. So should you actually have a physical shield, whether it's a small, medium, or large shield, that will add a bonus to your parry. For example, a medium shield is the most common. That's +2 to your parry defense, but only when you're literally employing the shield, right, armed with it. Otherwise, a buckler or small shield adds +1, and a large shield, probably the rarest of the types, because even though they're +3, they're pretty bulky and stuff. There's some pretty hefty penalties for having one, but if you do, that's +3 to your parry defense. And another difference about the shield too is that you can use it against melee attacks. So usually dodge when someone's attacking you with a ranged attack, it goes off of your dodge defense. However, because you can't parry it with a weapon unless you have a special talent called parrying specialist, I think, or parry, ranged parry. Anyway, there is a talent that you can use. You can parry missiles out of the air without a shield. But if you don't have that talent, which most people want, because it takes a good bit of skill and talent or experience points to get to it, you can, if you have an actual shield, you can use it to block arrows, as people actually did in real life and still do, or physical attacks from spells, and then the obvious one is melee attacks. So yeah, that's kind of cool. So it makes shields even better. Having done some decent amount of historical reenactment in the past and like some martial arts, all that kind of stuff, all that kind of fighty stuff. I was really good with a shield for a while when I was in the SCA. I got really good, and a lot of the fighters were really good with a shield. And that made me really realize that a shield is, and most historians will agree with this, a shield is by far your best piece of armor. If you can, and it's not always armor, you can use it defensively a lot too, like the Greeks and the Vikings did. But if you're good with a shield, it is really hard to get hit if you know what you're doing, if you can see where the attacks are coming from. And even in like gang battle, if you're really good at covering, like using the shield to cover certain areas at certain moments and keeping it mobile while your body is being mobile, it's even in wolf and pack tactics, it's really hard to get hit if you're good with a shield. So I wanted to give shields more love. So they already give a decent bonus to parry, kind of like the D&D level bonus. But the fact that you can employ them against any kind of physical and incoming attack, I think is really cool. The only caveat to that is you can't add it to area of effect things. However, there is a talent called Shield Mastery that allows you to apply that shield bonus to even against, you can use shield defense even against area of effect, like Dragon Breath and stuff like that, which I think is really cool. And really kind of cinematic. So those are your 3 defenses: dodge, parry, and shield. Next thing I have 6. So some people have asked, I wouldn't say a lot, but some people have asked, is there armor and weapon proficiencies in SK, or they've asked why aren't there? To which I like to reply, first of all, I think they're, I don't know, kind of lame. I kind of get why they have them in D&D, because they're trying to create more specific classes. Now, Savage Kingdoms, we do have callings, which are kind of like classes, but they're not quite as restrictive. But I wanted to do it a little bit more realistically. Wearing armor is something you do get used to, but it's not like so much where you would have disadvantage on agility and strength checks like D&D does for not having the proficiency. Again, I get why they do it, but to put it into some sense of reality and realism, that's way too much of a penalty. Yes, wearing armor you definitely get used to, but most people can wear light, like in real light levy armor, or like light leather armor, and it's not really that big a deal. You can get to it, used to it in a few hours or a few days. Medium armor, maybe a few days. Heavy armor, a few weeks probably. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is those things are already built into the system. For example, if you want to wear heavy armor, like heavy chainmail, assuming you can afford it or find it, that's like a -4 skill penalty to a lot of different things like brawling, athletics, acrobatics, magical arts, stealth. So that's all well and good if you want that protection, but just know those penalties are built in. So I tried to kind of simulate it like what it is kind of in real life, sort of. And then also certain, like really heavy armor has a mobility penalty as well. Like usually it's no more than -1, maybe -2. So if your mobility is only 6 and you're wearing really heavy armor, you might be slowing your mobility rating down to 4. That's only 4 yards per action that you're moving. So things to consider. There is a talent called Armor Acclimation. It's been here in every edition. That's really kind of cool to alleviate some of and it does represent what I was just talking about, like someone who literally, probably every day of their life, wears body armor, at least probably medium kind of armor, and you just get used to it. It just becomes like second skin, almost literally, and so that's what that talent represents. Same with the Shield Mastery talent. Is at that point you're so bloody good with a shield, it's really difficult to hit you, that sort of thing. All right, so, and then weapons already have a built-in kind of proficiency, quote-unquote, as well. So, yeah, so anybody could pick up, say if you pick up a great axe You could swing the great axe just like anybody in real life could pick up a big axe and swing it, but if you're not particularly strong or particularly trained or skilled at it, then you have some penalties. You might get lucky and smack somebody, but most likely you probably won't. They'll probably dodge it or block it, or you'll topple over or something. So that's already kind of figured in there. So every weapon has, well, not every, but some weapons, some of the heavier ones have like you need a physique of +0 or better, which is average, or even +1, I think, for a maul. And then every point you're shy of that physique is a -2 penalty. So, and I think this is in past editions as well, pretty sure. For example, so say you have a physique of -1 and you pick up a maul, a big two-handed hammer that requires a minimum physique of +1, and you're 2 physique points short. That's a -4 penalty if you attack with it. So again, you can totally do it, but -4 is pretty hard to overcome. Because you can see with the system, it also kind of applies to damage, right? So -4 takes your odds of hitting the opponent's defense down, but also even if you do hit the opponent's head, you're probably not going that far ahead unless you score a natural 20. And even then, you're still -4. So yeah, it's all factored in there. And I'm pretty pleased with that. We'll kind of keep it that way. And then skill specialties kind of are the opposite of that. So if you have a skill specialty in a maul, for example, or whatever, a war spear or range weaponize a longbow or a crossbow, that's a +2, an additional bonus for using that type of weapon. And so that's kind of the flip side of that. That's kind of the training side of it. Yeah. Oh, and just on that note, before I move on, there's also minimum agility for certain weapons, like a sling, I think flail, and a whip all have like minimum agility +0, maybe even -1, because those weapons you can kind of hurt yourself if you don't know what you're doing with those weapons. So same thing applies. A clumsy character picks up a flail and say is 1 short of the agility requirement. There's a -2 bonus there on the attack roll. All right, moving on to point number. So we're almost done here. So we're moving on to health and stamina. So those are not necessarily combat traits, but mostly are, health especially. Health is like hit points in D&D, as anybody knows. Most game systems actually use health or life anyway. Hit points is very D&D or Pathfinder specific. Well, not all, but that's mostly where you see it. You see it in some other games too, but all those games are kind of derived from the original D&D OCR systems. So, and just to be clear, in Savage Kingdoms, health does represent mostly like flesh. I know there's a debate from D&D, not really a debate. I mean, even Gary Gygax himself said it himself, that hit points represent not only meat, so to speak, but also kind of luck and the ability to dodge out of the way, and a little bit to do with stamina as well. But in Savage Kingdoms, health very specifically is kind of your body health, your meat, so to speak. Whereas stamina, the other trait, is your mental and spiritual energy. So there's health and stamina. And they all start around average of like 10 or 11 for just like an average character. But you might could start as high as 15, 20, 22 in either one of them. It's a little easier to start with slightly higher health and stamina, but it is certainly possible to start with decent stamina, especially for magicians or spellcasters, because all spells run off of stamina. There's also combat maneuvers that run off of stamina, so it actually behooves like a pretty dedicated warrior type character to maybe pretty decent at stamina as well, or at least average. And there's a few other talents as well, including even a couple of social talents that kind of run off of stamina, like special cool things that you can do. So stamina is kind of the fuel for that. Stamina also fuels like real life things, like if you row a boat for hours, I think it's 1 point of stamina per half an hour, unless you're going really slow. If you travel more than 10 hours in a day, in SK, it's costing you 2 extra stamina per every hour afterwards. If you're riding on a horse or some other mount, they take the stamina damage. The rider takes half, which kind of makes sense because you're still having to stay awake on the saddle and stuff like that. So there are real life stamina uses. Staying up the entire night costs 5 stamina points. So when in the morning comes around, you're down 5 stamina. If you stay up 2 nights in a row, that's 15 stamina, which in most cases would be 0 stamina left. 0 stamina means that you're exhausted. Exhausted is -5 to all of your die rolls, defense, and mobility. Those of you who have stayed up 2 nights in a row, which I went a couple of times did when I was younger and could. Probably can can probably account for like that, how that's probably kind of pretty realistic. I used to stay up 2 nights in a row at Dragon Con like a fool when I was in my 20s and 30s, but there's no way now. I would be completely wiped out. I can barely skip 1 night of sleep and function. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So health, when you get to half health, if you're injured or wounded or in some other way get to half health points, you're staggered, like in previous editions. That is a -2 penalty. It's considered a condition. It's a -2 penalty to your all your die rolls, defense, and your mobility, because it represents that you're kind of hurt, and it's kind of showing on your body. Because again, this is health. This is your body. Stamina is the same thing, though. If you get half stamina, there's a condition called fatigued. Now, in previous editions, staggered and fatigued did not stack, but in the new edition, they do. I'm pretty excited about it. It sounds a little, it's a little harsh, but I think it's very real. And now Savage Kingdoms is set up to be more of a -2, -4, -6 system. Most penalties and bonuses go in twos. There's still some +1s and stuff. So it's all very modular and it all kind of stacks up on each other. And I've kind of done that on purpose, and I think it works pretty well. But I think if you are at half stamina and half stamina, you probably should be -4 to all your die rolls and stuff until you can get appropriate rest or healing. Oh yeah, so since I mentioned getting to 0 stamina was a condition known as exhausted. By the way, half stamina is fatigued. By the way, it's the condition name. Half health is staggered, right? I think I already said that. So severely wounded is the one you go to 0 health. You could also be unconscious or incapacitated. All right, so for example, if you get taken to 0 hit points, this has been cleaned up in the new edition. It was a little sloppier in the early editions. If you're brought to, say, 0 health points, you are severely wounded, -5 to all your die rolls, defense, and mobility. And also, there's a chance that you are unconscious. There's a pretty good chance. You get to roll, make an endurance roll against DR10 plus the negative that you're at. For example, say I said you went to 0 health. Let's say you got wounded to go to -2 health, which is a thing. So the DR, therefore, would be 12. You have to roll on your endurance roll. Which doesn't sound too difficult. It's not that difficult, but once the negatives start piling up, it gets really harder to do. If you do succeed, you're still conscious, but you suffer the severely wounded condition as I outlined. And then every round afterwards, you have to roll again. So in the DR, every time you fail that endurance roll, if you fail, you fall unconscious and you bleed out 1 point. If you critically fail, you bleed out 2 points. So that it's kind of nice to be there so people can't kind of metagame and go, well, he's got, Alric over there has 3 rounds left before we really need to get over to him. But, he could crit fail and bleed out 2 points that round. Also, if you critically fail and bleed out 2 points, you also earn a weakness, a physical weakness. Whether you get to choose, actually the GM chooses depending on the type of wound injury. But it's either disfigured, maimed, or lame. Disfigured, lame, or maimed, depending on the type of injury. And it's really kind of up to the DM. Say if you were lacerated across the face by a creature, that would probably be disfigured. If you were impaled by a spear that sent you into the negatives and where you critical failed, that could either be lame or maimed, depending on where the spear hit you. So it's really largely up to the GM, and the GM might even allow the player to choose the weakness there. So that's kind of harsh, but it should be. When if you get to negative half your health, you are dead, just like in previous editions. You have bled to death, or maybe you're instantly killed. So we do track negative health in Savage Kingdoms, at least a little bit into it. So the last thing I'll mention are range categories. I kind of touched on them earlier. So range weapons and spells all have close, short, medium, long, or extreme. The only exception is that some spells have touch as a range, whereas in melee combat, there's not really a touch. That's close range. Or reach, I think is what we'd call it. And I might change that. I might kind of sleekify it a little bit and make touch spells just be called reach spells, because that way they kind of blend more into the rest of the nomenclature that we're using for combat and that sort of thing. So yeah, so we have close, short, medium, long, extreme range. That's basically 10 yards, 20 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards, 20 yards, thereabouts. And those ranges exist to not where you don't have to worry about I'm 49 yards away, and then next round I'm going to move 7, and that's 56. It's not like it's that difficult of math, but it does. I have noticed it's slowed games in the past down a little bit, so I just thought this would kind of clear it up. I've seen some other games kind of do something similar with ranges, so I think it's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to play testing it a little bit more. So anyway, that's all I got today. Sorry this video went on for 45 minutes. I was expecting to be like 30, 35, but they're always longer than I imagine. Thanks for hanging in there if you've been to the end. Thanks for checking out my cat Nymeria. My next video will probably be about combat in the new game. So please tell people about the new game. Get ready to support the Kickstarter when I do it, maybe in like April or May, something like that. Check out SK4. Post your comments down below. Let me know what's up. And I'll talk to you guys again soon. Thanks.